au Festival de la Recherche. Before we start what promises to be a fascinating but also perhaps moving panel, n'est-ce pas, Gabriela? I would like to take a moment to read the land acknowledgement that we usually read at Glendon, but as we're not all gathered in the same space, we recognize that the land acknowledgement might not be for the territory that you're currently on. And of course, it might not apply to everyone. And I'm talking here about our colleagues from Romania. Mais si c'est le cas, nous vous demandons de prendre la responsabilité de reconnaître le territoire traditionnel sur lequel vous vous trouvez et les titulaires actuels du traité, le territoire traditionnel sur lequel vous vous trouvez et les titulaires actuels du traité. Nous reconnaissons que de nombreuses nations autochtones ont, avec les territoires sur lesquels les campus de l'université York sont situés, des relations de longue date qui précèdent l'établissement de l'université York. Glendon, en tant que partie intégrante de l'université York, reconnaît sa présence sur le territoire traditionnel de nombreuses nations autochtones, and the area known as Toronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and the Métis. It is now home to many indigenous peoples. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and this territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. Je vais maintenant parler, étant donné que je parlerai de Dorin, je parlerai en français. Je crois qu'il m'en aurait un peu voulu, me connaissant, de m'adresser ou de parler de lui en anglais. Et puis, c'est aussi plus facile pour moi de le faire. Il y aura bientôt un an dans une semaine, le professeur Dorin Uritescu nous quittait. Nous n'aurons malheureusement plus l'occasion de partager sa bonne humeur et d'entamer avec lui en face à face, dans les couloirs ou autour d'une table ou au téléphone, ces débats sur certains aspects pointus ou moins pointus de la linguistique qu'il aimait tant. Je l'ai souvent taquiné sur le choix. Mais ce grand linguiste, ce chercheur passionné, de par le fruit de ses très nombreuses années de recherche, occupe toujours et occupera encore pendant longtemps une place de choix au sein des réflexions de la communauté linguistique. Et c'est pour ça que nous sommes ici aujourd'hui. Nous allons dans quelques instants parler de son legs le plus important, l'Atlas de Crișana, qui représente sans doute le mieux ce qu'a été la majeure partie de sa vie de chercheur. Mais je tiens à souligner aussi que si nous sommes réunis ici aujourd'hui, si le Centre de recherche sur les langues et cultures en contact existe et peut célébrer sa recherche, c'est aussi en partie grâce à lui, puisqu'il en est l'un des cofondateurs. C'était il y a 16 ans. En 2005, les professeurs Dorin Uritescu, Raymond Moujon, qui se joint à nous en ce moment, Daniel Simeoni, qui n'est plus avec nous malheureusement, et Ian Martin, créé ce qui allait devenir le premier centre de recherche de Glendon. Un centre de recherche à l'image de Glendon, aux activités étroitement liées aux objectifs et à la nature même de notre faculté bilingue, et destiné à promouvoir la recherche collaborative et pluridisciplinaire dans le cadre du contact linguistique et culturel. Donc, merci Dorin. Je ne serais pas là où je suis sans toi. Je le disais, Dorin Uritescu est avant tout un passionné de recherche et un passionné de linguistique, dialectologie, linguistique historique, notamment, car ses intérêts et ses connaissances allaient, nous le savons tous, bien au-delà. Il était titulaire de 2 doctorats, rien que ça. Le premier décerné en 1978 par l'université de Timișoara et le second obtenu en 1994 à l'université de la Sorbonne Nouvelle, lui valut la mention très honorable à l'unanimité et avec les félicitations du jury. Il reçut en 1998 le prix de l'Académie roumaine de linguistique, en récompense pour le premier volume de son atlas de Crișana. Et en 2011, le mérite académique de l'Académie roumaine pour sa contribution à l'étude et à la promotion de l'étude de la langue roumaine. Son activité de recherche lui valut aussi en 2001 le prix d'excellence décerné par le principal de Glendon. Donc, dans le cadre de ce festival de la recherche à Glendon, nous ne pouvions pas ne pas penser à Dorin, ce grand chercheur qui est à la base même, avec d'autres, de ce centre de recherche. Je ne mentionnerai pas ici ses très, très nombreuses publications qui lui ont toutes valu l'admiration, le respect de ses pairs. Si je commençais, je crois que demain j'y serai encore. Je vous renvoie au site web de notre centre, mais vous le savez tous, il a beaucoup publié. Je préfère laisser la parole à ceux qui l'ont accompagné tout au long de ce travail et particulièrement tout au long de ce qui allait devenir l'œuvre de sa vie, l'Atlas de Crișana. Alors, je vais commencer, je vais donner la parole ici à la personne qui pourra peut-être parler le mieux, et certainement parler le mieux du début des recherches de Dorin, de comment ça a commencé. Donc, j'aimerais vous présenter Ramona. Alors, vous regardez son nom, Uritescu Lombard, and everybody understands that Uritescu Lombard, she's Dorin's daughter. Merci, Ramona, d'être là. Donc, Ramona, après avoir obtenu sa licence en langue moderne à l'Université de Toronto, a continué ses études à l'Université de Western Ontario et à l'Université Harvard, obtenant un diplôme en littérature comparée. Elle enseigne depuis 2008 dans le département de langue et littératures allemandes et souvent aussi dans le département de langue romane à l'Université de Michigan. Ses intérêts académiques incluent la littérature, le cinéma d'expression allemande et française des 20e et 21e siècles, Kafka, Müller, Camus, Annie Ernaux, que j'aime beaucoup, ainsi que l'école de Berlin et la nouvelle vague française. Elle est co-auteure de, alors là, désolée Ramona pour la prononciation, Imaginäre Topographien, Migration und... Vas-y, dis-le. J'ai fait de l'allemand, mais moi, ma prononciation est horrible.
Oh, ça suffit, c'est bien comme ça. Migration und Verortung. Emplacement, c'est le mot allemand pour emplacement.
D'accord. Et ça, c'est en 2007. Et elle doit, nous dit-elle, à son père son appréciation pour les tournures inhabituelles et les tours de force linguistiques. Alors, premier tour de force, elle va nous parler, parce qu'il faut que ce soit bilingue, anglais aussi. Elle va nous parler de Dorin et des recherches de Dorin en anglais. Mais je m'arrête là, j'ai déjà beaucoup trop parlé et j'aimerais donc lui laisser la parole. Merci Ramona d'être ici aujourd'hui.
Thank you. I will continue in English, as I said, as Sylvie mentioned. Thank you, Sylvie, first of all, for organizing this event. It was a not inconsiderable amount of work, I can imagine. Thank you to everyone who is present today for taking time from your schedules to be present, to participate, whether with some words or by listening, certainly with feeling, to this event. I appreciate all that York University has meant for my dad, has done for my dad, and is doing for my dad, as well as I'm sure York University appreciated what my dad has done for it. And thank you, Sylvie, for that wonderful summary of my father's activities, professional and administrative. My task and a delight, because with great delight. is to present to you a portrait of the linguist as a young man, a title on which both Sylvie and I agreed. So I will speak not to the importance of the Atlas, for which I'm not fully qualified to speak, and for which there are people here who will speak much better than I could. I'm not going to speak about his many publications. Sylvie has mentioned them. I'll speak more about the beginnings of his career and what came to be a lifelong passion. So in 1943, my father was born in Romania, and he was not a particularly obedient student, but he was a good one. Besides being very good at school, he was also good at soccer. My grandmother, his mom, thought that soccer was not a serious occupation. What is that? Mature men running after a ball. So dissuaded him from a soccer career, for which he had actually been qualified. So had she not been there, we would not be here. In fact, my grandmother played an important role in my dad's academic career, specifically the beginnings and also continuation of the Atlas, because she financed a lot of the dialectal research trips to the mountains of Crișana. And without her support and without the support of my mother, who provided stability, encouragement, this Atlas would not have even started. When Sylvie and my mom were first talking about this event today, and asked me to say a few words, I kept thinking, what will I say? What I'm going to talk about? And this past few days, I've been ruminating about my dad's Werdegang in German, way of becoming, and two things have crystallized for me what perhaps is most important about his path. And these two things are very disparate. One of them is a movie that I saw just recently, or saw part of just recently. I have no time to watch full movies anymore, not during the academic semester. And this one is The Professor and the Madman. It is 2019, about the making of the Oxford English Dictionary. It stars incongruously Mel Gibson as the philologist James Murray, and Sean Penn, perhaps more fittingly, as the madman, the retired Army colonel who contributes a great deal to the Oxford English Dictionary. That is one item. The other item is an article from the New York Times, published in that appeared on April 6th. That consists, whose title is a virtual memory for those we've lost. And it's a photo album. It consists of photographs people have sent into the New York Times with objects that signify a memory, the memory of those they've lost during COVID, and to whose funeral and they were not able to be present because of COVID. All of these objects going before my eyes, I thought to myself, what is an object that I would send in, whose photo I would send in, were I to do that? And that it's the briefcase, la serviette. Because to go back to the beginning of my talk and the story of origins of my dad, because when my grandmother said to him, soccer is not a serious occupation for a grown man. A few years later after that, my dad came back to his mom, my grandmother, briefcase in hand. And that briefcase was a sign, was an image, a symbol of his academic career, of his seriousness now in her eyes, and she congratulated him for it. The movie Professor and the Madman shows the kind of meticulous, sustained work that is necessary for a project as big as a linguistic atlas. And my father was prodded into this project in his 4th year of study by his professor. He embraced it and made it his own. The requirements for the informants or for the people whom he interviewed were equally detailed. For example, to have good dentition, all the teeth in their mouths, to have no more than 4 years of schooling, to have a spouse from the same village, to only occasionally travel to the city, and not to have children going to school in the city, and to be from the village from birth, and to have possibly, ideally, come from a family that has been in this village for generations. You see the kind of meticulousness, right, and the difficulty to find such a person in, 70s Romania, as isolated as these mountain villages were, yet people traveled often, and their children went to school in the city. And so to find these folks was very, very difficult. And then to gain their trust was equally difficult. And there are countless anecdotes about interviewing these informants and having to do so in an indirect manner, so that the word that my father was looking for, much like the words that the professor and the madman were looking for in the quotes in books, my father was looking for words coming from people, so that these words would be brought up or would come up in conversation spontaneously. So the indirect questioning was something that was painstaking, that my father would do over and over again, would spend hours speaking to these people, gaining their trust, engaging with them, developing relationships with them, because he would go back to these villages year after year. What about the briefcase? Yes, he would have a briefcase with him every time. My mom has his latest briefcase at home. The briefcase itself is not as important, the current iteration of the briefcase. It's more the idea, what it meant for not just my grandmother, the seriousness of her son's occupation and, his status in the world as an academic. Proud mother that she was, but also what it meant to my father was his dedication, his passion for linguistics, his devotion to a life of the mind. And he would carry, and it was also a practical object. If you know my dad, you know that he always had a briefcase with him, and that it was always full, in fact, bursting with papers. So he would arrive in these villages, first with his senior professor and mentor, later by himself. He would arrive with a briefcase. If you know anything about communist Romania, you might remember that having a briefcase was double-edged, because the members of the security police also would carry briefcases. And so when he first showed up in these villages, he was always regarded with some suspicion before, of course, developing relationships with people, becoming known to the community. And so he was regarded with suspicion. A man coming from the city with a briefcase, knocking on doors, asking to speak to people about their daily lives, interviewing them, sounded far too much like an interrogation, like spying. So the work of overcoming this initial obstacle was something that my dad had to do over and over again, and that he did gladly, because in fact he was among other things also an archivist. He wanted to preserve a connection to place, both to these places in Romania, in Crișana, these places that have since changed very much, informants who have passed on language that's changed, but also to a place that he came from, the village that he came from in Romania. He wanted to preserve the connection to place, to places and place, and to deepen this connection, to widen this connection, to include an historical consciousness and linguistic theory into this connection, even to include epistemological or existentialist questions in his work on place. So he would gain the trust of these people. He would ask his many questions, spend hours and hours, drink quite a few glasses of plum brandy because this was a sign of hospitality in Romanian villages. And to refuse was to be rude and would have, of course, excluded any amount of trust that you could build with these villagers. And so he basically had to overcome the briefcase and had to make people forget that he was a man carrying a briefcase. And he did. And I will leave you with this one final anecdote of an informant whom he was very fond of and who was fond of my dad. And with whom at the end of, I think, the last of such research trips, he had an amicable conversation after they'd finished all the questions. And this man said the following things to him: "Professor, this has all been very interesting. I never realized that how I spoke and what I spoke was important, and that it could be so interesting. You've taught me something. You've paid me for my time, so I thank you for that too. But all these days we've spent talking, the cow hasn't gotten milked. The field has remained unplowed. My vegetable garden is waiting for me. With all due respect, Professor, next time a man with a briefcase knocks on my door, I might think twice about inviting him in." Thank you for listening to this rather rambling talk about my dad's beginnings as a linguist. And I look forward to Lăcrămioara's presentation and everyone else's words about what this young man with a briefcase did and what he turned into. Thank you very much.
Merci, Ramona. J'ai du mal. Ça, c'est un aspect, this is a side of Dorin that we don't, a lot of us don't know about. And thank you very, very, very much for this. It's, now I understand the briefcase title too. That's him. And so I'm getting emotional, so I let others talk about the following steps after Dorin's research on the ground. And I would like to ask Sheila Embleton and Eric Wheeler to talk about the not exactly the next step, but it didn't come far afterwards. It's when the the Atlas went online, the RODA went online. So Sheila, I think a lot of us here know you, but I will still take the time to present you. Sheila's areas of interest are historical linguistics and language change, sociolinguistics, dialectology, onomastics, Finnish literature, women in language, and you've published in all these areas. You're the author of many books too, and I'll mention among many the emergence. You're the co-editor of the 2-volume The Emergence of the Modern Language Sciences Studies on the Transition from Historical Comparative to Structural Linguistics. Eric, you have a PhD in mathematical linguistics, and which explains your role also in the RODA from the University of Toronto. And after a career in industry at the IBM Software Lab, you took a full-time contract limited position with York's information technology program. The formal collaboration between Sheila and yourself began in about 1996, ça ne nous rajeunit pas, with Dorin Uritescu joining in 2001 and others since then. And Eric is currently an adjunct professor in the Department of Languages, Literatures, and Linguistics at York, but is otherwise retired. And he has an ongoing interest in computational models of language in various aspects of mathematics and old-time fiddle music. I understand there's also a little bit of camping too.
We hope so.
Which is not easy at this time. So I will let Sheila and Eric talk about their collaboration with Dorin on the RODA project. And please go ahead. Thank you.
Let me just see if I can share the screen here and a slideshow.
Yeah, great, thanks.
You can see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay, so I think what's going to happen is I'll speak first and then Eric will take it from there. So first of all, we'd of course like to thank those who organized today. So Sylvie, Prisca, and Gabriela, and brought us all together, even if it's virtually. So our title is RODA, the Atlas Goes Online, and RODA stands for Romanian Online Dialect Atlas. And so this is part of a research program, which is actually quite lengthy now, but began with work on English and Finnish dialects, and then later has moved on to probably the largest phase of it with Romanian, and that's of course when Dorin joined, and subsequently is moving on afterwards to some other languages. So some languages of the Nigeria-Cameroon border area, and that is involving Bruce Connell, who I notice is in the audience today. So thank you, Bruce, for your participation and sharing your data, and also some work with some Chinese dialect data involving a colleague who is now in Japan, whose name is Robert Saunders. So many papers have been published as Embleton, Uritescu, and Wheeler, always in our alphabetical order, and different people do different amounts on the different papers depending on exactly what's going on. But it's been roughly 30 papers altogether that have come from this research program. One of the main goals is to actually put the data online, to digitize the data and put it online so that others can, of course, use it as well. So, for example, with the English, the data came from Wolfgang Vierek in Bamberg. And I remember it coming. This will give you an idea of how long ago. It was on big computer tapes that were shipped from Germany to York. And I remember taking them over and, mounting them on the machines in order to be able to read the data. So it's obviously, a long time ago. And we went on to do other work with that data, and I'll come to that in a moment. With the Finnish, we used data that came from a dialect atlas, which I will also talk about later. And we had to digitize it, and then also with Romanian. So we'll talk about those things in a moment. But the main thing is to digitize this data so others can also use it for whatever their purposes are. We happen to use a method called multidimensional scaling to try to bring more information out of that data, but others, of course, use other methods. So I think we can go to the next slide, Eric. Yeah, so our use of multidimensional scaling, MDS, started from a notion that I had that using multidimensional scaling might be a better way to display and get information out of the dialect data than trying to use any kind of hierarchical trees. At that time, most people who worked in any kind of mathematical methods, even in dialectology, we're sort of bound by trees somehow, which are just not that appropriate for looking at dialect data. So we had this idea that we could use multidimensional scaling to take the data, which is in many dimensions, and through multidimensional scaling techniques, which you can get as essentially a black box in various computer programs, to reduce the dimensionality of the data down to eventually just 2 dimensions, which we would think of as a map. So on the right there, you see what a tree diagram might normally look like with perhaps some overlap and so on. But a multidimensional scaling will tend to cluster in a different way and display in a more visually appealing and more visually useful way. Okay, so next, Eric.
I put this one in. This is a classic tree that linguists used, in this case, the grouping of the Semitic languages. But my picture before was a little bit simplistic. This is the kind of tree that we were trying to avoid.
Yeah, because just looking at a tree like that, you don't really immediately see anything, right? You have to look at it and analyze very carefully, you know, read the small print and everything. It doesn't really tell you a lot in any immediately apparent visual way.
Yes.
So yeah, we referred already to working on the computer developed Linguistic Atlas of England, which, as I mentioned, was from Wolfgang Viereck in Bamberg, and his data that he had used there was from the Survey of English Dialect, which is a classic, well-known survey of the dialects of England. We also worked on later on Finnish using Lauri Kettunen's 1940 Dialect Atlas of Finland, Suomen murrekartasto. And there are very few copies actually of that paper atlas around, and they tend to be a bit fragile because, as you can tell from the date, it was published in wartime Finland, and the paper was not of the highest quality. It's also a very large and unwieldy book of maps, basically. So in order to do this, I had to carry a rather precious copy of that across the Atlantic twice in order to actually get it copied here. So we can now go quickly, I think, to 2 more slides, which I won't dwell on in particular because our main purpose here today is to talk about the Romanian. But this is based on the dialect data for English that we got from Wolfgang Viereck. We applied multidimensional scaling. By we, I mean here, Eric and I applied multidimensional scaling and produced this picture. Each of the dots is a town, and for various different counties. The thing about this display is that it arranges the dialects in a way that actually does very much resemble geography. That's of course good news, but with the dialects of the north at one end, and here that's represented at the top. Eric's just put the cursor there. And the dialects of the south have arranged themselves at the opposite end of that cloud, which, you know, is good. I mean, it is roughly how you would expect it to come out. But what it also shows is the kind of pulling together that happens, and that in a better version of this, a bigger version, you can actually see a bit of a gap between the north and the south. And so you see very much that there is a northern cluster and a southern cluster as a kind of main divide, but then of course all the subgroupings within. So what in effect we have then is a linguistic map. And if you would superimpose on a geographical map or a notional geographical map, the two resemble each other quite a bit, but where there are discrepancies is really where you're getting your information from. So it shows the kind of bunching together that you get for north and for south. And we'll maybe now just quickly go on to the Finnish one before I turn it over to Eric. In Finnish dialects, and here we had to digitize it ourselves, and so we used a lot of student power to hand input all that data from the paper maps. And so that was a large phase of the project. You can see that you have the Western dialects of Finnish and the Eastern dialects, so the red and the kind of yellow color. And that is conventionally how people think of Finnish dialects, Western and Eastern. But what we were able to see here is that kind of other section in the middle. And these are primarily, they're the Northern dialects. You can see that there is some kind of interleaving there of the Western and the Eastern, which accords with impressionistic accounts of Finnish dialects. But what's also interesting, I was just reading a paper the other day, or starting to read, a lot of people are now starting to talk about there being this third cluster of Northern dialects. And as you can see, it shows somewhat on this map as well. I'm going to turn it over to Eric in just a moment to talk about Romanian. We do have our acknowledgements at the end of the paper, so I will leave that part for now. But I would also like to just talk about the role of serendipity here, in that, of course, Eric and I went to graduate school together at the University of Toronto, but we didn't do any of this work then. We didn't think about it at all. It's just later when I started to think about methods and MDS and so on that Eric and I got together to think about how to actually do this research. So that's one piece of serendipity. But the second one, and the more important one for today's event, is that the reason I met Dorin at all was at a reception in the French department on the Kiel campus at York, because he had just published one volume of the Dialect Atlas, and I had gone in an administrative role to give a speech at that event. And I met Dorin and started to look at his atlas, and I could see immediately that this was just made for the research program I had embarked on. And so that was an incredibly important piece of serendipity, just happening to meet that day at that event that I had been sent to for an administrative reason. So it was great to have met, and you will now see from Eric the results of our collaboration on Romanian. So over to Eric.
Okay, thank you, Sheila. I think you could see in some of the earlier pictures that we showed you that we were struggling a little with how to present the multidimensional scaling and mapping and how to make the groups jump out and be visible. So one of the things that we managed to accomplish with the Romanian is I think we got much better at presenting the data, and to Dorin is much of the credit for that, because he and I would sit down and he would say, but Eric, couldn't you do this? And couldn't you do that? And my reaction always was, oh, here's some more work for me. But it paid off. We got to do great things. So Dorin came with, as you can see, just a wealth of data from the Crișana region in northwest Romania. And it was the output of all this extensive field work, but mostly by Dorin and by his supervisor Stan, at 120 locations with hundreds of elicitations. Now we get asked sometimes why Romanian and why Northwest Romanian of all places. But this is kind of a heritage family tree of Latin. And as you can see, the familiar Romance languages, Portuguese, Spanish, Catalan, French, and so on, are all on this side. But Romanian is the primary example of what happens on the eastern side. And the two languages, the two groups, among other things, they took the word for that in Latin, which could appear before or after a word, and turned it into the definite article, the word for the. And in these languages, always that was on in front of the noun that it modified, but on this side, it comes after. So just one of the examples of how the development of Latin and Romance languages is needs Romanian as a way to give you the complete picture. The other part, of course, is that the Crișana region is fairly conservative in terms of Romanian dialects. And so there are things that we would see in Crișana that you might not see if you were in dialects of Bucharest or somewhere else. We began more or less having volumes 1 and 2 available in hard copy, and we had to digitize those. Working from the Atlas, which had been on those maps handwritten, all of the elicitation forms, and also we could go back to the notes that had fed into that. And from that, we created both what we called raw data, which is the form that was elicited, and interpretive data, which was what someone like Dorin or others thought the data meant. So an interpretation of the data, and they would have interpretive maps down in the corner of the main map on each of these. And there was also metadata. Occasionally we saw symbols in there that said only an old person would use this, or only a woman would use this, and so on. From volumes 1 and 2, we now have 3, 4, and 5. And these ones, 3, 4, and 5, were published by, first of all, digitizing the data and then creating the maps out of the digitized data. And that was a system that worked a great deal better for the creation of those books. RODA is an online system for using the digital data sets. We also created software to help people, primarily people in Romania and editors in Canada, to create the digital data set. But RODA itself is for using it. And it works something like this. If you look at the bottom here, there's a little picture of the hard copy atlas, and a typical map would look something like this. Magnify it up, and you see that they have written letters with accents, sometimes 2 accents, sometimes letters with characters underneath them that are not in my English alphabet anyway. Sometimes we had characters with accents and then another character with an accent over top of it. And of course, these are the little metadata symbols that you would get. So all of that would be written on there. And in order to digitize this data, we had to somehow enter it into a data set. To do that, we created a 2-character system where A3 would indicate that particular form of A. The +2 would say in a particular position around here, we are adding a W9. So the code itself was kind of computer readable only. People didn't read that code. But what it did produce was a set in the first instance of 407 maps, each map showing 120 locations. And in RODA, you had the ability to select which maps you wanted to look at. And then having made a selection, you could view the data that was there. You could go through and search for a particular pattern. In this particular one, we're looking for a final U versus a final A, and make a map that showed you what was happening there. And if you created one of those, you could create an interpretation map, not only look at the ones that Dorin had created in the Atlas, but you could create your own interpretation maps. And then using the analytic tools, multidimensional scaling, we could make a multidimensional picture of your selection of maps over the interpretive data or over the raw data. The last function that RODA had was just a plain map, but you could click on certain locations and hear the data. That turned out to be difficult to put online because the data was so big that we didn't have very many of those, but some of it was there. With RODA 2, and this again was Dorin saying, gee, I wish we could do this, and couldn't we do that? We upgraded the system with publication quality maps, putting in metadata that you could search on, and giving online access to this data over the internet. So that made it a whole lot more useful. And Andrea Oprea was our chief programmer for that, and in some sense, the designer of the improvements there. And that was used, used to publish the hard copy versions of 3, 4, and 5. We wanted to reach out to other languages, and so we took RODA and stripped out the things that were particularly Romanian specific and made it a general online dialect atlas. And we focused on things like data access and multidimensional scaling. And we've used it for Finnish, for Mambila, which are languages in the Niger-Congo region. Again, Bruce Connell's work there. And for Chinese, which came from a variety of sources, but all through our colleague, Robert Sanders. In terms of dialectology, with RODA, Dorin was able to get evidence for positions that he took in Romance linguistics. And that became important because he was able to use, quote unquote, all the available data. Somebody out in the audience couldn't say, but yes, in my village we did this, because Dorin could say, look, I've looked at it all. He could see and list the supporting examples. And more important, he could see examples that seemed to illustrate something, and he could say, oh yeah, that's because it's that sort of a thing, and we can take those out and ignore the obvious exceptions that should not be in the argument. And he could show it as a map. So here's an example of word final oo and schwa from Latin endings. In Latin, canto, and pardon my pronunciation, and oculum, in Romanian, cant and ochi. But if you're in the dialect versions, you might have got an oo on the end of that, cantu, or cant, in which oo is either syllabic or non-syllabic. And the same here for that. This is the sort of base map that we started with, the Crișana region. And if you can imagine overlaying those locations with just dots, we could then map those oo things with a horizontal bar and the non-syllabic ones with a vertical bar. And it kind of jumps out at you where these different features are. Some cases, no occurrences or very small values. Now, we did the same thing for, whoops, pardon me. We did the same thing for word final A and schwa, which again had dialect variations that showed up here that wouldn't have shown up in standard Romanian. And a lot of this consisted of weakening the A or the schwa vowel. And we could, map that onto that same map. The position that Dorin was able then to take was to say the oo, which show up here in red, and the weakening of schwa, which shows up almost everywhere in black. And he could say, yes, we've got two weakening processes here. People had argued for that. But now when you look at the data, you see that they're not the same weakening process. That what's going on in oo is not the same thing that's going on in A. And that was the sort of things that you got. Oo loss and mid-vowel raising are separate processes. Both are weakening processes in naturally weakening positions, but geolinguistically, they were two different processes. So we used RODA to make a number of arguments that appealed to dialect theory, if you like. We also used it to look for dialect groups, and we could find when we used MDS that there were two distinct areas, one in the south and one in the north, that separated from the area in the middle of Crișana, which was kind of a continuum. Now I'm going to jump forward and show you that map. There we are.
Maybe 2 minutes, Eric?
I beg pardon?
Can
2
you
minutes?
conclude
Yes,
in
we're
2
almost
minutes?
done.
Thank you.
Okay, here is the MDS map that shows a north and a south area. This is a three-dimensional view that you see from sides and the other way. This is the standard interpretive map, which you can see in RODA 2 looks much prettier than what we had before. But we could also found that when we didn't use all of the data, but selectively picked either morphology or syntax or something, then these things came out much faster. We also looked at distance relationships, and there's a long-held assumption in dialectology that the further away you are from, the further apart two villages are, the more distinct their dialects would be. And when we did that measurement in Crișana, we found out that that indeed was the case. It wasn't an exact, it was like an R value of 70 or 80, as opposed to 100% exact. But then when we tried that on the Mambila data and the Chinese data, they found that it didn't work very well. And we think that it worked in Romania because the geography was such that it needed to be that way. So I think Dorin has encouraged us to really do something quite beyond what we might have got to otherwise. It makes the field work accessible to others. It uses the new technology in the humanities for access and analysis and presentation of data. And it certainly allows for others to do further work, both theoretical and practical. And Dorin was front and center in all of that. Our acknowledgements to SHRC for various grants, the Romanian Academy for support, for the students and colleagues in both Romania and Canada who have worked on this project, and in particular to Lăcrămioara, who as editor just made amazing things happen, and to Andre for his work on the software. And with that, I'll turn it back to, well, I guess to Lăcrămioara.
Yes, thank you, Eric. Merci, Sheila. Thank you very much. I'd like to remind everyone that we'll leave questions for the end when everybody has presented. It'll make things easier. So if you have a question and you don't want to forget about it, please make a note of it, and we'll come back to it. Merci. Thank you very much for showing us the unicity of your work. And Lăcrămioara, you will show us the next step, how that was RODA 1, now it's RODA 2, and we're looking forward to telling us what your work with Dorin was all about. But first I'd like to say a few words about you. Lăcrămioara graduated from the Faculty of Philology at the University of Timișoara, and after working as an instructor for a few years, she started her PhD studies in general linguistics and psycholinguistics at the University of Bucharest, and she had a thesis in early child bilingual development. Soon after she arrived in Canada in 2000, she started collaborating with Professor Dorin Uritescu on several projects, mainly on the Romanian Dialect Atlas Crișana, and as we will hear, on the online version. And I would also like to mention that you contribute regularly to the Romanian cultural magazine Observatorul in Toronto, and this is for Romanian colleagues. Lăcrămioara, it's all yours. We're
Thank
listening.
you. Thank you so much. I thought it's going to be much easier than it actually is. Thinking that if you wake me up at 2 o'clock in the night and ask me about this project, I would be able to talk about probably for hours, not just for a few minutes. So what can I say about 20 years of collaboration with such an amazing professor? So first of all, everything that you already heard about his passion and creativity and dedication for what he is kind of meant to be and to do. So I'm going to try in a few minutes to show you, to try to convince you actually about how I'm sorry, can you see my oh no, not yet. Okay, can you see the?
That's good
Yes.
now.
Okay, thank you. So I tried to convince you that this RODA 2 is kind of a vision and the legacy of Professor Dorin Uritescu. So one main question is why a RODA 2? You already heard that RODA 1 was an amazing tool that helped not only one scholar but 3 scholars to do amazing research, and it was so innovative and so creative that you would ask why a next version. So actually it was one particular fact, and only one fact, that kind of unsettled Professor Uritescu, and that was that the data had to be a bit manipulated in order to be ready for being analyzed. So it has to be what it was called normalized, and it wasn't affecting too much the results or anything, but it was something that he was considering and asking what can we do about that. So then, because Sheila told about serendipity, I have the same thought when I was preparing to say that, because what was the odds to find someone like me who emigrated from Romania and had some knowledge about how to do this kind of research and editing, because I worked with child speech, which is kind of very similar to how to adapt a non-standard language to be interpreted, and then to have a husband who happened to be programmer with I would say with the capacity to understand very easily what the requirement is and to have solutions for most of the problems. So then he came up with this idea to do it a bit differently. So if you open the program now, you would see 3 different sections. So one is the data analysis, which I'm going to probably talk about more. So you have here all the maps, the analytical and the interpretive maps, which are found in the published maps. They were digitized using the keyboard created by Professor Wheeler. And here you have, a few more other things that you can add. And I think the publications are going to be very important to add as long as the research is going further. So basically what RODA 2 is now So you have a data, which is the content of the maps digitized as they are. So now they are practically 5 volumes, so more than 1,000 maps digitized. Then you have the metadata that we came up with, which is a grammatical description of the data. You have some search criteria and a display, different ways of displaying the results. And I'm going to try to talk a bit about it. So this is, I'm sorry for the quality of my screenshots, but they are very big images, so I didn't know how to make it a bit better. So I'm not going to talk much about the data. You've heard in the first presentation that it's a lifelong process to gathering and organizing and determining that data, and then to put it into maps. And that is something that, you know, Dorin Uritescu really dedicated his own life. If you ask Gabriela, she would say that she was married to the work. So in the last presentation, probably you're going to hear even more about how this big process was done. So just to give you, however, an example of the how meticulous he was into creating and selecting this data and transcribing the data, which Ramona mentioned at the beginning, is recently I found out, just preparing one of his early papers for publication, that he actually made a very elaborate research and experimental phonology to prove that one particular transcription of one ambiguous vowel is important to be mentioned and to be used in showing the data, which it's because it's not just a phonological occurrences or articulatory occurrences as it was believed, but it is a systemic part. It's a part of the phonetic system of the dialect, and like this, he proves that his transcription of the data and how he shows the exact pronunciation. It's a pertinent way of doing it, even though others were ignored it or thought it's not very relevant. So he went to this particular attention into showing his research and discoveries, and this perpetuates in everything he did. So what the metadata became, so it was a very detailed grammatical description of the data. So first, obviously, we just tried to replicate what was happening in RODA 1, because you wanted to be able to do kind of the same research using this particular way of analyzing the data. But then we realized that because we have a separate document describing things, we can add there whatever we want. So you imagine that the creativity and the demands of Professor Uritescu started to grow, and we added layers and layers of descriptions of what's going on there. So they are primarily morphological and morphophonological descriptions, because these were the main interest at that point for Professor Uritescu. But as I'm going to explain a bit later, it can be added and developed into whatever a researcher actually wants to see and find out. So this is kind of a work which took many years and we updated it several times to fit whatever we wanted to see. So you imagine that there are more than 1,000 maps, so with 120 entries, and every single one is described like that. So the difficulties to creating the metadata was to find the the right way of encoding, in a way, the descriptions that we wanted to be seen in a logical way for the program to be able to be shown and found. So as you can see here, we kind of came up with the way that we were able to understand the program. So for one entry, you see here the lexical, the morphological structure, morphophonological structure, and all the other descriptions. Another difficulty was that, as we all know, dialects don't follow the rules of the literary language. So we have to find ways to describe every single part of a complex utterance, for example, using the tools of the grammar of the Romanian academic grammar that was kind of giving the reference of how to describe the phenomenon. So we managed to find some solutions, and I think it's going to work pretty well for now. So here you see something that Professor Vila didn't show you. It's an amazing way of creating the digitized map. So it's a very nice keyboard which allows us to introduce all the data with all the particular complex features that every transcription needed. So we introduced this into the program, so that allowed for the researchers to search not only for the metadata but also for the actual data. So it created very, very complex research criterion. So here you have, what Andre and Professor Uritescu worked hours and hours to find a way to show as many possible ways of searching, comparing the data in a way to show possible results as they could. So you have here a few options: how to use only the data, how to use the metadata search, how to use multiple combinations of data and metadata in order to have more complex research. Here you have all the metadata that is available, so you can search for whatever it is encoded there, going straight here and find, if you, I don't know, want to see where it is a place with just 3 articles there, you can search for this and have a display of what's going on. So you have here an image of the search criteria that Professor Uritescu used and saved. And as you can see, they are very complex ways of doing the search. So his creativity went to the extreme using this way. So I would show you only one particular. If you can see, he could use 3 different streams of criteria to find what he was particularly interested. So what this way of searching is allowing is to find very specific things or very large data in order to what you are interested in doing. So maybe I would say that what this program brought was a bit a more specific way of searching for the particular dialect and interest of what Professor Uritescu had in mind that can be a research for this particular thing. So then we go to the way of displaying. So you've seen already amazing way of displaying the data within RODA 1. So what this brought, it's for example, you see here, you can have the data shown in various ways. So I used here the logarithmic one because there are many data. So a linear one would be very hard to show everything. But then what you can add actually the physical map, and that's very important for many reasons. You can do geolinguistic studies and sociolinguistic studies based on what the geographical image and context can give you. And then also you have the area of influence of a particular phenomenon. So it's something that Professor Wheeler already mentioned, that they that you can say for how long, for how wide a specific data can stretch, and here you see the micro areas where a particular phenomena is acting. So I would go back to this, because when I'm talking about a vision and a legacy, I would say that what Professor Uritescu tried to do with this, it was to lay a very strong foundation, giving a solid theoretical and practical way of exploring and understanding not only a particular dialectal area, but to put this tiny dialect into a larger context and discussion of Romance and general linguistics discussion and research. And he put into this whatever he found as a very important way of approaching such a complex data. So I would like to say that this is also a very easy way for further development and addition. So for example, we talked about adding an etymological explanation there, which would have been an amazing addition, because as you probably know, the Crișana dialect is an area of language context for hundreds of years. So it's extremely interesting and important to see how the lexical and the semantic field developed there. And I think that this could be a very solid research for a bachelor or a master or whatever young researcher would want to start a linguistic career. So for example, but also it can be add lots of other lexical and semantic descriptions in order to analyze those aspects. So of course, Professor Uritescu was mostly interested in the phonological and morphophonological aspects, because these are the deep foundation, the deep roots of a geographical and historical change, and gives you the core structure of a dialect or a language. So he went for what we would say highway of research and of understanding the linguistic phenomenon. And I don't have to tell to anyone what a great linguist he was and what his research is leaving behind. Another part of his legacy that I want to mention is his big admiration and respect for the academic institutions. So obviously we hosted, you know, the site. It was all done in our accounts, but he wanted so much, and rightfully, that this site to be hosted by an academic hub. So we are very happy, and we are happy that before he left us, he found out that the site is now hosted by the Institute of Linguistics in Cluj, which is a very serious and an amazing research and scientific institute. And now they have a dedicated programmer. So I'm sharing Professor Uritescu's contagious optimism that this is going to be well maintained, developed, and his work and his legacy is going to be carried on. Thank you.
Merci. Thank you so much, Lăcrămioara. I'll remember. I'll note. Contagious. Yes, his passion was contagious, and we can all attest to this. Yeah, a lot of details, a lot of creativity. Always wanted to go further, but still very practical. And yes, I think all this work, as you've, as Eric, Sheila, and yourself have demonstrated, was a very hard and long process, but it was really worth it and unique in its way. And thank you for showing us what you did together. I would like to let now the girls, as Dorin would say, explain what they did also with him in Romania. And thank you so much for being here with us today from Romania. And I understand that you're still working like others, but on Dorin's work on the Atlas, and you are the voice of the future, really, right now. So we will let you talk about the next steps. But before that, I'd like to say a few words and present you to our audience. So Veronica specializes in dialectology and geolinguistics, and in the history of Romanian language. She's been a researcher at the Romanian Academy, and sorry for the pronunciations, Textil-Pușcariu Institute of Linguistics and Literary History from Cluj-Napoca. And she's been working as a team member in projects regarding Romanian regional atlases, and as a team manager in projects on editing and digitizing dialectal text manuscript. She's a member of the Scientific Council of Textil-Pușcariu Institute, and she's organized 5 international symposia on dialectology. She's also a member of the organizing committee of the international conference. There again, I apologize. Sylvie Textil-Pușcariu, and the associate chief editor of Dacu Romania news series. Gabriela is chercheur scientifique à l'Institut de linguistique et d'histoire littéraire Textil-Pușcariu de l'Académie roumaine. Elle conduit ses activités de recherche au département de dialectologie onomastique dans le cadre de 3 projets. Le Nouvel Atlas linguistique roumain, Crișana, bien sûr, le trésor toponymique de la Roumanie, et que j'en oublie pas, certains textes dialectaux. Ses principales publications incluent bien sûr l'Atlas Crișana, le Nouvel Atlas linguistique roumain, Crișana, le titre exact. Elle est aussi co-auteure de Predicative Supplementar, le prédicatif supplémentaire, fonction syntactique hétérogène en 2014, volume qui a reçu le prix pour les premiers travaux en linguistique. Donc, je leur laisse la parole. Je vous laisse toutes les deux nous parler. I'll let you talk about your work with Dorin Uritescu and the Atlas as of now. Merci.
Cette présentation, je vais vous donner quelques détails sur l'importance du nouvel atlas linguistique roumain, Crișana, le verbe, dans l'espace roumain et roman, et que est la phase actuelle de ce projet. Pouvez-vous voir la présentation?
Pas pour l'instant. Not for now, no. Oh, yeah, yes, it's coming.
Le tome 5 de la
Yeah.
Le tome 5 de la série du Nouvel Atlas linguistique roumain Crișana est destiné aux formes verbales. Par comparaison avec d'autres parties du discours, le verbe nous offre un grand nombre de phénomènes qui contribuent à la caractérisation du sous-dialecte de Crișana, même si leur aire de diffusion ne coïncide pas toujours avec l'aire de cette unité dialectale. Le coordonnateur de cet ouvrage, le professeur Dorin Uritescu, a pensé une autre structure d'organisation du tome, différente des autres atlas régionaux, au sens que les formes verbales n'apparaissant dans l'ordre donné par le questionnaire du Nouvel Atlas linguistique roumain que partiellement. Pour la rédaction de cartes destinées aux formes verbales, Dorin Uritescu prend comme modèle l'Atlas linguistique roumain, le 7e tome, volume où les formes verbales sont cartographiées et groupées par Modertor. L'ordre de catégories planifiées et documentées est indiqué dans le tableau ci-dessous. Le tome comprend 270 cartes grandes analytiques en 2 couleurs qui présentent des données linguistiques intéressantes du point de vue géolinguistique, c'est-à-dire les données qui mettent en lumière une variation géolinguistique signifiante pour l'histoire de la langue roumaine ou pour la place de la langue roumaine parmi les langues romanes ou finalement pour l'interférence linguistique entre la langue roumaine et d'autres langues. Les données enregistrées dans le map analytique sont analysées en 309 petites cartes interprétatives en couleur. Ces cartes mettent en lumière tous les aspects signifiants de la variation géolinguistique. Le grand nombre de cartes interprétatives s'explique par le désir d'analyser la quasi-totalité des aspects géolinguistiques signifiants. Les cartes interprétatives se réfèrent aux aspects de la morphologie verbale importants pour l'évolution de la langue roumaine en cadre roman. Ces cartes présentent dans une perspective géolinguistique les divers isoglosses phonétiques, morphologiques, morphophonologiques et lexicaux qui caractérisent la variation linguistique dans la province romane historique de Crișana. Ces cartes concerne le phénomène morphologique considéré comme spécifique au sous-dialecte de Crișana, și, morphème du subjonctif, la formation du conditionnel passé à l'aide du passé composé du verbe vouloir et l'infinitif du verbe à conjuguer, la conservation du forme ancien de passé simple du type văzut, réalisé sans de suffixe -ră à la première et la deuxième personne du plural. La conservation de formes anciennes d'impératif négatif construit avec nous, plus infinitif long, plus désinence. Dans les formes verbales construites avec l'auxiliaire être, le participe passé est terminé en e, tout comme dans le dialecte roumain. Le cas interprétatif concerne le phénomène morphologique qui caractérise également d'autres unités sous-dialectales. comme la formation du plus que parfait périphrastique à l'aide du passé composé du verbe être, suivi par le participe du verbe à conjuguer, la généralisation du processus morphophonologique au modèle de la conjugaison du verbe, surtout pour la première et la deuxième personne, le déplacement de l'accent sur le verbe de la troisième conjugaison du radical réflectif à la première et la deuxième personne du plural, du présent indicatif et subjonctif, et également à la deuxième personne du plural d'impératif, l'opposition vocalique et consonantique. Étant donné l'importance de patois de Crișana pour la structure synchronique de la morphologie de la langue roumaine et pour son évolution en contexte roman, pour une série de cartes, le professeur Dorin Uritescu a rédigé et introduit des notes synthétiques historiques comparatives. Un autre élément qui fait la distinction entre Nealere Crișana et les atlas régionaux et l'atlas linguistique roumain est donné par la spécification du contexte grammatical informatif par laquelle on a obtenu la forme verbale pour laquelle on n'a pas formulé la question dans le questionnaire du Nouvel Atlas linguistique roumain. Dans cette situation, il y a le suivant mot de temps verbaux: l'imparfait, le passé simple, le passé composé, le plus que parfait, le futur, le subjonctif présent, le subjonctif passé, le conditionnel présent, le conditionnel passé, le gérondif, l'impératif affirmatif et l'impératif négatif. Il faut également préciser que pour le verbe être et avoir, les contextes grammaticaux sont adaptés aux particularités morphosyntactiques de l'exemple. La mise en évidence du contexte grammatical par laquelle on obtient une forme morphologique, c'est très important parce qu'elle peut expliquer et montrer de manière réelle si une forme verbale est utilisée ou non dans l'air investigué et où on évite à obtenir de formes verbales équivalentes du point de vue fonctionnel avec les formes verbales planifiées. Ces contextes sont mentionnés dans la première carte concerne ce temps mode-là. Aux autres cartes avec formes qui appartiennent au même temps mode, avec la question en direct, on fait référence à la carte où le contexte est spécifié. Le tome 5 garde le format de première 4 tomes de Nealere Crișana, publié par Editura Academiei. Le stade actuel de l'ouvrage. Pendant la période 2018-2020, on a rédigé 270 grandes cartes analytiques et on a réalisé 3 corrections croisées de ces cartes-là. On a établi le titre de map interprétatif et le coordonnateur du tome a rédigé le note historique comparative. On a réalisé la liste alphabétique de formes verbales incluses dans le tome précédent de Nealere Crișana. Pendant la période 2020-2021, on rédigeait 309 petites cartes interprétatives, on réalisait 2 corrections croisées de ces cartes-là, on a réalisé l'index alphabétique de termes enregistrés dans le cartes. Opération qui va être effectuée. À la suite de la correction croisée de petites cartes interprétatives, nous considérons qu'il faut rédiger approximativement 60 cartes. La rédaction de l'index alphabétique de nos titres avec la correspondance entre Nealere Crișana et l'Atlas linguistique roumain et roumain. La préparation du tome 5 pour la publication. Le tome sera remis à Maison d'édition Editura Academiei Române à la fin de cet été et nous espérons qu'il paraîtra en 2022. Le volume peut également être consulté en ligne. Tous les aspects innovants qui caractérisent ce tome depuis sa conception jusqu'au moindre détail d'organisation et structuration du matériel sont grâce au professeur Dorin Uritescu. Dans la rédaction du matériel dialectal, nous avons suivi strictement et rigoureusement les observations et les suggestions du professeur et nous espérons que le tome 5 de la série Nealere Crișana sera bien reçu par la communauté académique. Les 13 ans de collaboration avec le professeur Dorin Uritescu dans ce projet de recherche ont été grâce à celui-ci une révélation, des observations, les suggestions et des arguments pour résolution de problèmes de rédaction, interprétation de phénomènes dialectaux ont relevé un modèle de professionnalisme, rigueur et générosité, le plus heureux modèle de collaboration entre le monteur et le chercheur qui se trouve au début de sa carrière. Je vous remercie.
Merci. Veronica, will you be adding something? Or
Yes, of course. First, I would like to say once more what Gabriela already told you and what I heard that the other participants think of meeting Professor Uritescu. We feel the same thing. It was more than fortunate meeting him. Meeting him representing a turning point in our careers, and it is a great honor for us to be here with you today and share a few things that we experienced during our collaboration. And I would like, I don't know if I have enough time, but I would really like to say a few things about the perspectives in developing the Atlas experience. I will try to share screen now.
sure.
Okay, let me see. When talking about the Atlas experience, we have in mind two ideas. The one, as I was saying, that working with Professor Uritescu had a major impact on our understanding and approaching the dialectal material, the way a linguistic atlas is made from collecting data stage to editing maps, interpreting material, editing the auxiliary elements, and during all this, seeing the dialectal phenomena in connection. And another aspect regarding what the institution now, the Institute of Linguistics, the Sextil Pușcariu Institute of Linguistics, where we work, can provide and develop in using the innovative and important tool in approaching the linguistic material Professor Uritescu and his co-workers have succeeded in doing. Thus, the perspectives regarding this important experience for us. First of all, we would like to say a few things about the material in Crișana archive. And we come with a solution regarding the material that's left. So 1,156 maps have already been published or prepared for publishing by now, but the questionnaire has 2,000 questions and more than 500 additional professional questionnaires. And there's a lot of material waiting to be edited. And we thought of completing the editing using the RODA program, not just publishing lists of materials or giving away raw material to the specialists interested in the material that has not been published or by now considered from a lexical point of view less interesting, let's say. Of course, there's a part of dialectal text collected during the inquiries, and Mrs. Uritescu told us that she has the tapes, the text registers, and if we'll have the possibility, we'll try to valorize that material also to transcribe the text and have a volume of text added to the material collected during the inquiries. And another important thing regarding the material collected for Crișana is the fact that all the words collected or registered in the maps will be used in the dictionary of the Northwestern dialects of Romania, which is a project among the others in the development strategy of the Institute. That's very short saying about what the material for Crișana in Crișana archive is available right now after finishing volume 5. But of course there is the project Lăcrămioara told us about and mentioned. The digital analysis of the data in the regional linguistic atlas is based on meta-linguistic characterization. It was already implemented at Sextil Pușcariu Institute. We, by now, of course, I won't insist on this aspect because you already know it very well. What we have succeeded by now to make the general map of the cartographic points of the regional atlases involved in the project. There are more than 600 cartographic points with the possibility of extending to the whole network of regional atlases, which is almost 1,000 points. And to this, it is added the new atlas of the dialects at the south of the Danube, which have already used actually RODA program for editing the analytic maps. And I will try to show you the way the map looks like. If, okay. I don't know if you can see that. I'm sorry, I'm not very good with the technical. Sorry.
Okay.
Oh, it's I wanted to show you the map. Okay, can you see it?
No, I think it's not part of your.
You will have to stop your share and then go back to the share screen, and you'll be able to select the map.
Okay, now select this one. Okay, no share. Okay.
You have to stop sharing it. There we go.
Yes.
Okay, so it's a PDF here. I don't know if it's very visible. I'll try to make it have a glimpse of it. Actually, it's the map of the for the question gray-haired here. I won't insist on it. We just wanted you to see it, how it looks like in this network of 622 points, cartographic points. Okay, I'll stop sharing this and go to another project that we wanted to speak about. I will try to be as quick as possible. It is a project regarding editing and digitizing the material in the archive of the Romanian Linguistic Atlas. This is a national atlas. And the inquiries took place between 1930 and 1937. Diachronic dimension could be added to the linguistic data offered by these inquiries. I will skip the details regarding the networks and the questionnaires used. And what is to say, the fact that there are two nets, two different parts of this atlas. We have 300 points in one and 82 in the other. And we also wanted to show you that for the second part of the Romanian Linguistic Atlas, that of having of 85 points network, RODA program has already been applied and is working. And for the first part, it is being adapted and soon be ready to use. We are coming with more data for analysis. This is the idea, and we have great plans for what Professor Uritescu initiated in Cluj-Napoca. So the experience of working with Professor Uritescu at the Atlas of Crișana and his visionary legacy regarding new methods and approaches of dialectal material reflected in the development of modern instruments of processing the linguistic data have found the perfect ground in Sextin Pușcariu Institute tradition in dialectal research. The projects Professor Uritescu initiated in his home country for his beloved dialects and for linguistics have already struck roots, and we hope they will grow with the coming years. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So impressive. I don't know if you've seen on the screen behind me, I think that Dorin's smile just widened. He's so proud of all the work you did and you're doing. And I know for a fact when we were talking that he knew he had to work with you. He had to go back because he knew there was so much else to be done, and he wanted to have everything in your hands so that you could go on when he was gone. And I think that's you really showed us that that's the case. So 2022 for the publication of Volume 5.
We really hope so. Yes, yes.
Wonderful.
Really hope so.
Please let us know.
Of course we will, and we will be very much interested in continuing the collaboration because as for the project Professor Uritescu initiated that for the northwestern dialects of beginning with Crișana and developing the program Lăcrămioara told us about, we would be really thankful if we have your assistance and guiding, because as far as linguistic coding is involved, we have never worked with that by now. We only introduced the data, edited maps, interpreted maps, and doing whatever was necessary for that. And we are very much interested in knowing more, doing more. And of course, we also think of honoring Professor Uritescu in the following year to dedicate a special issue of Romania new series, a scientific review in our institute, to be dedicated to his to dialectology and his work. And we would like you to write something, material to be published in this special issue. But
wonderful.
We'll...
So if I may just add a few things. So I prepared a very detailed help document explaining step by step every single thing that is in the program. And then I'm obviously here for whatever everyone needs to use the program, because I really think that it's something that can help many researchers to actually do a wonderful job. And I have big trust, as Professor Uritescu had, in the Institute and in the girls. You're right, this is how we all call the girls, and I'm so happy to see them. You know, we worked together in a way for so many years and we didn't see each other. So maybe that is also a thing, you know, in these difficult conditions that we are now, you know, with the lockdown and everybody away. So I want to mention that all these projects, with all this tremendous amount of work did by everyone, was done in this type of conditions. We are all, in a way, isolated and communicated very well and did this. So I think it's hopeful from this point of view also, maybe for young researchers or students, that if they see us, it is possible. You just need, you know, one visionary person to keep us all together, as Professor Uritescu did. And as Sheila mentioned, this amazing serendipity moments for all of us. And it's what is important, you know, is, as the German said, if it's a will, there is a way. So I think this proves that, you know, the most unexpected people gathered and did such a beautiful thing due to the big heart and generosity and obviously the scientific person that Professor Dorin Uritescu was. So thank you. I don't want to take more of the space, but obviously I'm available for whatever everyone needs to continue, of course. Thank you.
It will continue. Thank you very much. I'd like to because it's 11:50 already, so we don't have that much time for questions, but please, we'll make time. Anybody's got a question or a comment to add? I know we're all emotional, but let's look at the positive aspect, the vision behind Dorin.
Sylvie, je ne sais pas si j'ai bien
Gabriela,
compris. Je voudrais te remercier à toi et à vous tous pour faire Dorin vivre encore, parce qu'en fin de compte, j'utilise bien le mot vivre. C'est exactement ce que vous tous, vous avez fait si bien aujourd'hui. Vous avez fait Dorin vivre encore et toujours. Merci.
Il n'a pas besoin de nous, Gabriela. Regarde, l'Atlas vit. Dorin vit.
Je sais ce que tu veux dire. Merci. Un grand merci à tous.
Merci à toi. Anybody? Merci, Gabriela. Mais il est là, on le sait. Il est avec nous.
Je l'espère.
Anybody else would like to say a few words on the Atlas, on Dorin, on what it means? We'll have another event next week with Philippe Bourdin, but that's next week. So today, any questions for us?
Maybe I could just say how impressed I was with hearing from Lăcrămioara and from Veronica and Gabriela. There were things going on there that I didn't realize were happening. I knew they were, but to hear what you said today was wonderful, and thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Yes, indeed. It's and in a way, thank you for that pandemic, because what we're doing today, we wouldn't have done like this. I wouldn't have been exactly the same thing. I mean, you know, in person, yeah, but we're all here together from all over the place, thinking about Dorin, his work, his vision. And as Gabriela said, we're just showing that he's still around. He's there, and his work is it keeps going. So, oh, Reagan, Dorin was one of my professors when I was a graduate student in Études Françaises. And later I had the great pleasure to work with him as a research officer at Glendon. He was always so kind, true, enthusiastic, true, about his work. And I so enjoyed chatting with him. Yes. Merci, Reagan. Anyone else? Philippe Bourdin. You've got the chat. Philippe was with us a few minutes ago, but had to leave. And on the chat, and you will get it. You will have the link for Wednesday when we talk about his work with Dorin. Anyone else? I would like to thank also the people that came for Dorin today. David Heap, who is here. Thank you. People I hadn't really met before, so I'm really happy to see you. Françoise. Ton micro.
Oui.
There
Voilà.
we go.
Non, j'ai beaucoup apprécié. Je ne suis pas assez versée dans le travail que font les jeunes qui ont présenté pour pouvoir faire la version de Dorin et mettait tout son cœur et toute sa valeur dans ce qu'il faisait, dans ce qu'il entreprenait, à la fois en recherche, mais aussi en enseignement. Et toujours avec la même bienveillance, toujours en mettant en valeur les gens avec qui il travaillait et pour lesquels il travaillait. Donc, c'est ça que je retiens dans ce que vous avez présenté. Et je trouve que ça reflète bien le personnage de Dorin, sa personne. Voilà.
Merci Françoise, sa passion, oui. Et c'est vrai, je dois dire aussi, I have to say that I've heard so much about the team when we were together, and I was talking about the Atlas, and he was passionate, but it was not presented as his work, but as a teamwork, and he wanted this to be obvious to everyone that he couldn't have done a lot of these things without the team. So yes. Anyone else? We're all no. Let's not be sad. So we tried to show that the Atlas is still alive, and the person behind it is too. And if I may, I would like to have a little special thought for him today, and let him know that we're all very proud of what he's done and what is done for the linguistic community. J'aimerais aussi remercier tout particulièrement Ramona, qui nous a donné une autre perspective sur le linguiste. Son petit sac, je trouve même plus mes mots là, sa sacoche. Sa serviette, sa sacoche, et son grand cœur. David, did you have your hand up, or I saw something? Yeah, so he's just going like this. Yeah.
D'approbation.
D'approbation.
Ben, pour signaler les gens qui étaient là, je crois qu'il est parti. Il y avait Martin aussi d'Oxford.
Oui, but Martin will be with us on Wednesday when we talk about the long article that Dorin wrote with Philippe before he passed away. And he, just like the Atlas, he just wanted to make sure that everything was ready, everything was done before he could let others take over. So we'll talk about this on Wednesday. Because Wednesday is the 14th and the 15th is, as you know, a very important day. Je voulais vous remercier une fois de plus. Ramona. Oui,
I am so sorry. I am teaching at 12.
Okay.
I would like to once again thank you, Sylvie. Thank you, Priska, for organizing the seminar. Thank you to all other speakers who highlighted the work that they have done and are doing, will continue to do with my father's or on my father's atlas. Thank you for being here and being with us. And for all your good thoughts and appreciation of my dad and his work. I must say goodbye now. Perhaps we'll meet again. Bye-bye.
Merci, Gabriela. And I just wanted to point out that this has been recorded. So if you want a recording or the link to the recording so that you can pass it on to people who were not able to be with us today and to realize how important, well, they do know it, but today was really strong to see how strong Dorin's legacy is. Please ask us for that link. We'll be pleased to pass it around. Merci à tout le monde. If you need anything, I'll stay here for a few minutes. Hopefully we'll see you on Wednesday at 12 Toronto time to hear more about Dorin. Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Merci.
Thank you.
Merci. Thank you, Martin, and I'll see you on Wednesday. Merci. Email us, says Priska, crlcc@glendon.yorku.ca to request the link. Merci. Si vous voulez aussi participer d'une manière ou d'une autre mercredi, il s'agira surtout de l'article avec Philippe, mais s'il y a quelque chose, comme il s'agira d'un anniversaire, s'il y a quelque chose que vous voulez faire passer mercredi, ce serait avec grand plaisir. C'est malheureusement la seule façon dont nous pouvons partager ce genre de choses maintenant. Donc, essayons de joindre le scientifique à l'humain. Ça a toujours été possible, mais c'est difficile en ce moment. Voilà. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Sylvie.
Au revoir. Au revoir. Bonjour aux confinés d'ailleurs.
Merci.
Merci.